Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hey everyone, welcome along to another edition of Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show here on True North. It is Friday, April 21st, 2023. We are doing things a little bit earlier. We're trying to fiddle around with the Wednesday programming and the Monday programming and the Tuesday programming this week, so we figured we would also fiddle around with the Friday programming and see what works. So if you like the earlier show as you head into the weekend, let me know in the comment section, and if you don't, also let me know in the comment section. But typically people do not like to hold back on their negative comments, so it's good to, overwhelm them with a bit of positive. I want to talk this week because it is a Friday, and we like to go out with a bit of the lighter side of the news with a discussion about this heist in Toronto at Pearson Airport, a $20 million heist. Now, when I first heard this, I assumed someone had just made off with a grocery cart, because if you've been to a grocery store lately, I think that's the price of basically 4 eggs and a pot roast gets you to the 20 million pretty quickly. But it is not groceries, it is not food products, it is gold and other valuables. If you were an Austin Powers fan, $20 million that they took away, and without a trace of evidence and no witnesses so far, and very remarkably similar to a heist at the Lawton airport in Toronto 60 some odd years ago, which to this day has never been solved. Maybe it is an old-timer trying to relive lost glory, and the guy that did the first heist, or the woman, you never know, you never want to be presumptuous, but I'll talk about that a little bit later on in the show. I also want to just talk about this report that was done by the Public Health Agency of Canada that was submitted to Dr. Theresa Tam. Now, she did not, as has been reported in some places, write this report. She was the recipient of the report and the target audience of the report, but it has also cited her language and cited her policy objectives on a number of fronts. And if you go to the Government of Canada website, the report is called What We Heard: Perspectives on Climate Change and Public Health in Canada. It was prepared by a number of researchers, submitted to PHAC, submitted to Dr. Theresa Tam, the woman who became a household name throughout the COVID pandemic as being the so-called top doctor in this country. And Theresa Tam has now gotten this voluminous report in her hands that warns of climate change. Now, you may think, okay, what's the big deal? A day can't go by without some Liberal cabinet minister talking about climate change. I was at one point it was in Juneau, Alaska, so the capital of Alaska, and I spent a day there, and I went into this little coffee shop, and they had a community bulletin board, and I was just waiting for them to make whatever I had ordered. And I was looking up at the community bulletin board, and it was fascinating because Juneau, Alaska is not a large place. This is not a booming metropolis. It's got I just looked it up, 32,000 people live there. And you look up on the bulletin board, and the first one is, how to talk about climate change. And the second poster is a lecture at the library from some climate change expert. And then the third poster is one advertising some climate art show that they're putting on. And you go through 9-10 of these things. And then the one that I saw last, which I thought was a great closer, was why don't we ever talk about climate change, a panel discussion. And I was like, well, you should let the first 9 seminar hosts know that we don't talk about climate change, because they never got the memo. So all of that is to say, we hear no shortage of this from the government. Climate change is the thing that is basically the government's top vehicle for control now. So I was very curious to see how they're now positioning this more and more as not a political issue, not even an environmental issue, but a public health issue. This calls climate change a public health emergency. It also expands into other public health emergencies that are related to climate, like settler colonialism and colonization in general, and capitalism. Yes, they reference the fundamental problems of economic growth, capitalism, and colonization. These are now part of this public health crisis. And one quote here says, if we don't address capitalism, if we don't address colonialism, racism, the patriarchy, etc., we're going to tread water for a long time until we eventually drown. I can't see how much longer we can make believe that we're doing our job as public health practitioners with regard to climate change without addressing those fundamental systemic underpinnings of what got us here and what's continuing to lead us in the wrong directions. They talk about the core drivers of climate change as being unquestioningly capitalism and colonialism, as well as extraction. And then they have the audacity to say that there's also polarization that they are victims of. So this report is what you'd expect from some first-year sociology and gender studies major at the wokest university imaginable to put forth in their essay. But here we have people with letters before their name and after their name who occupy a tremendously powerful position in society that are entertaining this activist garbage without actually really making the case. And when they talk about capitalism as being a driver of climate change, what they're saying is industry is a driver of climate change. When you make something, when you make a product, when you produce something, it comes with, they argue, an environmental cost. Now, what they are not saying is that the alternative to this is deindustrializing. How do we deindustrialize? Do we go back to, doing the Flintstones cars and just take the combustible engines out of your automobile and drill out a section saw out a section in the floor of the car and then just, hope your calves can get you from point A to point B, which will not be that far away when you live in your 15-minute city. And the language in particular here, when they talk about emergency, is one we should be very, very concerned about because we've lived through a public health emergency, quote unquote. We know what governments do when they believe they are facing a public health emergency. And it means a completely divisive approach, wedges within society, a surrendering of civil liberties, all out of the ever-cited abundance of caution, out of an abundance of caution. And we'll talk about this in a few moments with Marc Morano, who's been warning about this since before it was cool to. But we need to be very wary when we start seeing the same language that was used about one issue over the last 3 years transition without even a major segue to this other issue. And now we're all supposed to expect that, yes, these are just two birds of a feather. The COVID situation is the same as the climate situation. And then at a certain point, they're going to be saying, well, now we've solved the climate, so now we need to go after capitalism. And capitalism is a public health emergency right now. Colonialism is a public health emergency. If you got something stuck in your tooth, that could be a public health emergency that requires a whole of government approach to deal with. So this stuff is not inconsequential. And if you followed the 2021 election campaign, you may have seen this story of Cheryl Gallant, who is a longtime Conservative member of Parliament in, I believe it's Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke is her riding. And I've met Cheryl a couple of times. I don't know her particularly well. But she had shared something relatively innocuous on social media in which she said, there are some people that would love to see a climate lockdown. And she was just eviscerated by the media. Aaron O'Toole was basically denouncing her because the media was demanding that Aaron O'Toole denounce her. And her crime was saying that there could be a climate lockdown, just like there was a COVID lockdown. Now, Cheryl will never get apologies from people when she's proven right. And at a certain point, I think we have to accept that there are no shortage of people who would like to see this happen. And you needn't actually look further than the case before the courts in Canada on the constitutionality of the carbon tax. And just to give you constitutional governance 101 here, there are in Canada, as a federalist country, separations of powers, which means there are certain powers that are reserved for the federal government, certain powers reserved for the provincial government, and every now and then you get an issue where it's not entirely clear which box it fits into. And this was the case of a carbon tax. So the provinces said, no, this is a provincial responsibility. The federal government said, no, it's a federal responsibility. And the reason why the federal government argued was that it was an issue of national concern under this doctrine of Canadian constitutional law called peace, order, and good government. I've bored you enough. I'll bring it back to political reality here. But what was interesting in that case is that some of the interveners, groups that were not the government, that were arguing in court with a position, like the David Suzuki Foundation, for example, like the Climate Nexus or whatever it's called, they were all saying, no, not the Climate Nexus, that's John Robson's group. They're good folks. It was some group with, they all have like the same name, they've just rearranged the words. But they were saying it's actually justified under emergency grounds. So they thought that because the federal government has the right to trample all over federalism, if there is a national emergency, sound familiar? They have the right to then do whatever they want to do, irrespective of the Constitution, on climate change. So this argument is not just coming from the fringes, it's coming from inside the House of Government. And that is why we need to be very wary and very concerned about people that are putting forward this report that I just mentioned before the Public Health Office, saying that not only is climate change a public health emergency, but so too is colonialism, so too is capitalism. Again, this is not some wacky wokeadoodle professor that is from some university that's just put this report and is saying, look at me. This is a report commissioned by the Public Health Agency of Canada, citing public health so-called experts in Canada, being put in front of the Chief Public Health Officer of Canada, who we know has been the beneficiary of government abdication of decision-making. So we live in an era in which public health officials have been given monumental power to make political decisions. And instead, we are supposed to accept that this is all hunky-dory. This is all fine. This is just the way things are supposed to be. So my big concern here is, I think, fairly self-evident that there are a lot of Canadians and Americans and Brits and Frenchmen and Frenchwomen and Dutchmen and Dutchwomen and people from all over the world that were all too complacent to go along with the COVID measures, these highly, highly restrictive COVID measures. And the reason was because they were brought into this line of thinking that it was an emergency, so they had to. Marc Morano has been warning about this since long before anyone else was noticing, and I think it's a great shame that no one in decision-making roles in Canada and around the world listened to him. He is the Grand Poobah over at Climate Depot, which is something you must read, and also author of the book, The Great Reset, Global Elites and the Permanent Lockdown. Marc, it is good to talk to you again, as always. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you, Andrew. Very happy to be here today.
Now, I want to just make a point here. You've done a presentation on this that I've seen before, and I have one of your slides from John Kerry here that I think is interesting, because this isn't just people like you and I that are drawing this connection. A lot of the people that are in the driver's seat of these policies themselves are putting this connection in place. And what we have John Kerry saying here is that the parallels between COVID and climate are screaming at us, both positive and negative. You could just as easily replace the words climate change with COVID-19. He couldn't make your point better with another line.
No, he couldn't. I mean, they're saying the quiet part out loud. And this has been going on literally since March of 2020. Immediately when the COVID lockdowns occurred, we had people like Jamie Margolis, who was the teen Vogue climate activist who actually testified in front of Capitol Hill, has given speeches all over the world, say if we can shut down the world for a virus, we can do the same thing for COVID. And this is the era when John Kerry, when all the environmentalists were saying that the cities are so much nicer, there's less pollution, the wildlife is returning. And the creepiest part of all, or the eeriest part, was in November of 2019, the United Nations said global emissions needed to drop 7% per year in order to meet the UN Paris climate commitment. And boom, lockdowns happened in 2020. And in December of 2020, the UN reported that global emissions had dropped 7% because of the lockdowns. So it was almost as if they called it and it happened. So the parallels here are amazing. You have your doctor in Canada, your Fauci, but we have our Fauci here. He has done in 2 separate peer-reviewed journals, Andrew said, he has merged COVID and climate, and he has said infectious diseases are largely the result of human encroachment on nature aided by climate changes. He had this published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And your point is very valid when you say it's not some crackpot professor or a Greenpeace blogger we're making hay out of. We had 230 medical journals, the British Medical Journal, all say that the way to tackle climate change, we need to follow the template that we used for COVID. And we all know what that template was: authoritarian public health bureaucracy.
I mentioned earlier on that, there's a tremendous hypocrisy in a lot of people on this. And we saw, I think it was, again, going back to March, April, some people celebrating how great it was for the climate, that no cars were on the street, that businesses were shut down. And there is something quite cynical in that. When I mentioned earlier, I don't know if you were on at the time, about how what these people want is to completely eradicate industrialization. It is actually quite transparent. I mean, one example of this is how net zero used to be, and in some circles, all the rage. We have to take enough carbon out to meet what we're putting in. But then you get people saying, no, net zero is not enough. We need absolute zero. We need absolutely no emissions whatsoever. And these people do want us to live in the Stone Age, but only us, not them.
Yeah, in fact, I'm doing a special report on the speech that I sent you. I gave it to the Heartland Climate Summit. I gave this speech. But in the COVID world, you have zero COVID, and this was practiced by the New Zealand Prime Minister, by China, and the idea is you can't allow a single case. Well, in the climate world, you have zero CO2, and they're actually pushing for this, where we're going to have no emissions from human activity. Both of them are anti-human. Both of them will result in tyranny. But it's another example of how these two groups of people think. And the way to simplify this, Andrew, is throughout history, the greatest abuses of human rights have occurred when governments have invoked emergency powers, whether they're wartime powers or terrorism powers, or in the case of COVID emergency. Well, what do they want us to do? In the United States, Joe Biden's being urged to declare a national climate emergency, give them 132 new existing powers. Their template, and this is the reason Jane Fonda said COVID was God's gift to the left. She's a progressive activist. And she said that because it gave them everything they wanted by bypassing democracy. And this is what we're looking at. This is why the New York Times and Obama administration officials, Justin Trudeau, has praised China's one-party rule, because they can just get things done. An enlightened group of people. I admire their basic dictatorship. These are what all the different figures have said. Well, COVID lockdowns gave them the once free West, literally to emulate one-party rule China. And that's why Jane Fonda said it was a gift to the left. So what they want to do on climate is, if they can get it in the realm of public health, and they are. Harvard School of Public Health has now said unchecked climate change will lead to more COVID-like viruses. So if you don't support the Green New Deal, the UN Paris Accord, you're a grandma killer. So you have public health now using that authoritarian power that they drunk from during COVID. They want to apply it to climate. And that's really what's happening in real time throughout the world, particularly with the WHO pandemic treaty, which here in the United States, the Biden administration is pushing us to get into.
One thing that we've seen now in 2023 with a lot of COVID stuff is a lot of historic revisionism from people that went along with the fear and panic and now kind of wish they hadn't and pretend they hadn't. And I mean, this is obviously a big thing in the run up to the U.S., to the Republican presidential nomination, where you have Ron DeSantis who's saying that no, he was against lockdowns from the start. And then a lot of these old clips of Donald Trump defending lockdowns have been circulating. And but I'm wondering if you think that people would go along with it again, because the big thing that I had as a point of frustration was not governments doing what governments want to do, which is trample on rights, but people all too willing to give those rights up.
It's a great question. I think it was Jeffrey Tucker from the Brownson Institute who had the best analysis. He said so many of us, and I include myself in this, in March of 2020, just thought this will never hold. The people are going to rise up. Can you imagine? We closed churches and schools and businesses, and politicians stay-at-home orders, cancel weddings, funerals. We empowered neighbors to rat you out if you had a backyard barbecue. We just thought there's no way this is going to last. Yet it lasted. So next time, the second this happens, we have to come out. We have to oppose every measure, including social distancing, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, and you have to agitate the public. We were too complacent, meaning us opposed to this stuff from the beginning, and we just thought the public will never accept it. Well, guess what? They did. So to answer your question, I just read an article a week ago that India was having a new outbreak of a new COVID variant, and many of the districts in India were issuing mask mandates again. And I don't know if the people were complying, but it's the government's tool. The go-to tool is for authoritarian crackdown anytime there's a threat. And that's the whole idea of emergency decree. So what this is, and the key is, we just heard this last week, they're going after, gas stoves, they're going after rice now, but they're not really trying to ban it all, or gas-powered cars. What they're doing is saying there's an emergency and a crisis. We're smarter, we're the experts. They literally want to take over every aspect of our lives and manage it so that we, the unwashed masses, can't ruin the earth, can't create inequity, can't create environmental destruction, a climate crisis. That's what this is all about. It's about them saying we can't be left to our own devices, and they're going to manage our food production, they're going to manage our transportation, they're going to manage our energy, they're going to manage our money to the point of central bank digital currency, where they're going to, like the Bank of England sent the quiet part out loud, where the governments will only allow people to spend on what they deem sensible, and the exact quote. So this is what we're facing. They're using these scares, COVID, climate, terrorism, war, as an excuse to literally manage every aspect of our life and the climate. And that's where they're going. And people, especially younger people, they're cheering it on. We have kids suing the government to go full Marxist in order to stop a climate emergency and ensure their climate future. Lawsuits in Europe and the United States, Canada, of kids as young as elementary school. So I'm not that optimistic that we have this great liberty streak and throughout the world. I think it's been severely dampened, and we have to ignite it. We can't wait for it to self-ignite.
Well, you're right, and these activists are not dumb, and I think you dismiss them at your own peril, because
Yes.
they're very shrewd. They know they have a captive audience. I mean, the fact that Greta Thunberg, a teenager from Sweden who's famous for skipping school, was getting an audience with, now the King of England, the Prime Minister, the President of whatever country is laughable, but they're the ones laughing at us. But they also know how to move the goalpost very adequately. I mean, one big example of this is, Paris Climate Accord in 2015, which was at the time seen as this monumental, huge thing for solving climate change. Countries agreed to keep global warming, with an asterisk, to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And then you fast forward, the countries agree to that. You fast forward to the Sharm el shakedown that you were at a little while ago, that we had you on the show about. And all of a sudden, it's 2 degrees is nothing. We got to get to 1.5. And the second anyone agrees to that, it's going to go down to 1 degree. Like, it's just, they know this. So there's no such thing as victory, because they just are using this all as stepping stones.
Yeah, in fact, I did a report 2015, right when they signed the Paris Accord, of all our grandchildren will thank us. This was world leader after world leader, including John Kerry, the French president, UK prime minister, President
And now
Obama.
it's like, oh, that was a crap deal. That was nothing.
Yes, and literally within 6 months after praising this historic thing that our grandchildren remember, John Kerry had his granddaughter on his lap when he signed for the United States. It was this historic. They literally came out and announced that it wasn't enough. It was woefully inadequate. And guess what? The world needs saving all over again. So we heard all the tipping points. Same thing just happened yesterday in the United States there, Andrew. We had the Inflation Reduction Act last summer, unfortunately, because one U.S. Democrat Senator, Joe Manchin of West Virginia, caved because Bill Gates got involved and he got promised all sorts of sweetheart deals for his district, for his state. That was hailed as a planet-saving measure that was essentially the Green New Deal by another name. And now they've reintroduced the Green New Deal by saying that the Inflation Reduction Act wasn't enough. So it's never going to be enough. There's no criteria by which they'll ever say we've solved the climate crisis. And it goes back to the whole founding of the UN Climate Panel. 1988, they are formed to say, we're going to look at whether CO2 causes a climate crisis. If it does, we get to be in charge of doing the science. In fact, the UN's own words were, we own the science and we'll make sure the world knows it by partnering with Google. But the UN also gets to be in charge of the solution. They get to hype the problem and the solution through these international treaties. Well, what happens? This is a self-serving lobbying organization. In other words, if they fail to find carbon dioxide is creating a climate catastrophe, they fail to exist as a climate panel. So they're never going to find it. And the fact that they do the solutions is the same thing. I mean, you have the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, is the former president of Socialist International. That is never mentioned in media outlets. This is a guy who goes out there and talks about how we have to overthrow capitalism and make this all happen or else the planet will die. And the media reports it as though he's a scientist. This is just, it's nuts. And most Americans, most Canadians aren't aware of these basic facts. They think these are experts and we're being warned of a climate crisis and we need to act.
Well, listen to Marc Morano's warnings. That's the best advice I can give to everyone. The warnings about them, not the warnings of the impending catastrophe that Jane Fonda and Leo DiCaprio want you to head for the hills over. He's the author of The Great Reset, Global Elites, and the Permanent Lockdown, and you can check out his stuff at Climate Depot. Marc, always good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks a lot. And just because we were talking about John Kerry, I have to share this little clip again. This was from January when I decided I would ask John Kerry about the big China-sized elephant in the room on climate. And to give a little bit of context here, here's a guy who takes the private jets all around the world to tell everyone that we shouldn't board planes because it's bad for the climate. And then he shakes hands with Chinese leaders. He shakes hands with the Venezuelan dictator Maduro. He shakes hands with all these people because he says they're partners in climate. Well, China is the great victor of our reduction of emissions because China just adds more coal, adds more production, adds more industrialization, makes huge money while we're all trying to figure out how to get our battery working in minus 30 weather. So I asked, or tried to ask, John Kerry about the China issue. Take a look.
Why should anyone else in the world have to deal with emissions reductions when China is not? You can't speak about China's impact, sir? Why should we have to deal with carbon prices when China is not lowering its emissions? Absolutely. You're between me and him. It's okay.
I don't know if I can call that, I don't know if I can call that an interview per se, because, you know, he didn't actually say anything. I did get lovely footage of the two bodyguards, one of which tried to like go and smack poor Sean with the camera there with her iPad, and then the other guy that was telling me I had to keep my distance when he was between me and John Kerry. So it's like I was already keeping enough distance, and that was that. And later I saw John Kerry palling around with the chef Jose Andres. Sean says precious memories. So yeah, we have to go back to Davos again and ask him a question. Maybe we can get the John Kerry private jet next time. Instead of having to slum it on Air Canada with Chrystia Freeland up in business class and Mark Carney and the president of BMO was up there and the guy from the Great Big Sea. Alan Doyle, I think his name is. I don't know how Alan Doyle of Great Big Sea counts as a global elite that is flying in business class on the way back from Davos. That is like a tremendous injustice. So, yeah, I like Great Big Sea, but if he can be a global elite in Davos, there's no reason that all of us can't be. But nevertheless, that was my attempt at an interview with John Kerry. I didn't get in on the Greta Thunberg scrum that was taking place because there was one point where I was interviewing someone really boring, actually, or trying to interview someone. And then across the street, I see this like amorphous blob of people that are all just descending down the street. I'm like, who the heck is that? And normally when you see the reporters, you can kind of see like, you know, the top of the head of the person they're all following around. And in this case, I couldn't. So I get up there and realize that they're all trying to interview Greta Thunberg, who has made her way to Davos to tell everyone to use less in the way of emissions and whatever. And you know, I actually don't get in on the whole anti-Greta Thunberg train, the battery-powered train, because I think she actually has her heart in the right place, and I think she practices what she preaches, and, you know, she has been very reluctant to fly, for example. I think she took a boat to America once and generally doesn't do much travel. I don't look at her with any ill will. I look at all the people around her that have tried to prop her up and make her this poster child, and it doesn't escape me that she is what is she now, 20 or 21, and still looks like a teenager, which is why she's like the Gary Coleman of climate. She just looks like a child, so they're going to just keep trotting her out until she's like a 50-year-old woman that's still running the same shtick. And you're like, wasn't she like skipping school for the last 45 years? And you just sort of shrug your shoulders and move on. So nevertheless, that is it for the climate stuff. I do want to talk very briefly about the Great Pearson Airport heist. Now, This is pretty significant. And I was talking about this with Rachel Emanuel on the Daily Brief today, which is a podcast you should subscribe to if you are not already. And I was like, there's a part of me that, just because I like heist movies and heist shows, there's like a part of me that's like kind of rooting for the thieves, especially because it wasn't an armed robbery. It wasn't violent. No one got hurt in it. And then I'm like, no. Theft is still theft. And this is $20 million worth of stuff that was taken, apparently owned by TD, or destined for TD, and I'm a TD customer, so now I'm just like wondering how much my monthly bank fees are going to go up, just because they have to like offset the loss of the gold and all that jazz. But what was Sean's also a TD customer, I'm hearing. So yeah, Sean, you're going to have to chip in on the heist recuperation fee, which is going to be on your next statement if you're a TD customer. The heist recuperation fee, but nevertheless, they've made no arrest. They don't even know if the items are in the country. They don't know who is behind it. There are no witnesses. They haven't alluded to any camera footage. So this is going to be like the Barry and Honey Sherman murders, where like every year, police will have a press conference in which they will announce that something has happened, that maybe they're reinvigorating the search, but they're never going to get there. And as you know, and as we talked about with Michael Bonner last week, I am a little bit of a history buff, and I would be remiss to not point out the 1952 gold heist from Malton Airport, which was the precursor to Pearson Airport, a heist that was never sold, never $0.3 million. So this was, I think, quite. So like I said, my theory, and if I were to write the screenplay of the Pearson heist, I would actually write it as though the guy behind the heist was the guy who was behind the 1952 heist, and he wanted his final hurrah before he ends up just packing it up and retiring. And he never sold, he never spent, he never did anything like that. He wanted his final hurrah. That would be how I'd script this. So if you are out there, a budding screenwriter, and you want to partner up on this, that's what we'll do it. We have to come up with a name for it. Pearson Airport is not a pun-worthy airport, so I don't know what we come up with there. Maybe we just call it like waiting in the security line for too long, and you just come up with the idea on, hey, I bet I could steal that $20 million in the time it would take me to get through security at Pearson Airport, and boom, what do you know it? You have all of that gold bullion that may or may not still be in the country. So let me know in the comments, do they solve it or do they not solve it in the next year? It is April 21st, 2023. We will set a little reminder and revisit this in a year. I say in a year they have come nowhere close to solving it, and we have forgotten all about it. And then the Netflix special will probably come out around this time in 2025. That's my prediction. So thank you to all of you who tuned in to today's show. I just want to give a bit of a plug, because this is often, we produce this as a video show, because someone looked at me once and said, wow, we need to put a camera in front of that for reasons. But we also do it in podcasts, so sometimes I'll reference this, great visual, and the people on the podcast can't hear it. But we do love the podcast audience. My background is in radio, so I have such a tremendous affinity for the medium. If you are not a subscriber to the podcast, please, please, please do subscribe. And the reason I bring this up is with what happened to Matt Walsh in the U.S., who's with the Daily Wire. His show on YouTube got demonetized. My friend Marc Stein posted a clip on YouTube from his show interviewing a woman whose husband died, or sorry, no, it was a different woman, a woman whose life was ruined because she had a vaccine injury. And this is something that she spoke about. It's been recognized and certified by doctors. She spoke about it in an interview, and then that clip got taken off YouTube because it violated their misinformation policy. So we recommend subscribing to us on as many platforms as you can, so that if we get vaporized from one, you can pick us up on the other. But we will never stop speaking the truth. And we thank so much those of you who support our mission and our mandate by tuning in, and also by financially supporting, which you can do at donate.tnc.news. So with that plug, wait, someone's calling us out. Someone is saying we're not really live. Can I hold up the comment and say we're there's an Andrew Lawton Show live truther out there in the live chat that is saying we're not actually live. And the reason he thinks that is because I don't interact with what's happening in the chat. Well, the reason why is because we do the show and we have generally a sense of what we're going to talk about, and I don't actually see the comments. So if something really good comes up like this one, someone who works on the show will flag it for me. But now I'm going to like have to start holding up today's new. Wait, hang on. I can hold up the time. Okay. Friday the 21st at 12:35. I mean, I guess I could have changed the time zone on you. So that doesn't give us any. I'm actually CGI'd. I'm not even here. I died 3 weeks ago, and I've now just been propped up animatronically ever since. So no shows are live ever again. I'm doing like the thing they did at the ABBA show in London, where they just have them touring as holograms. Anyway, with that, they conceded. All right, this is how you win the debate, everyone. All right. Everyone else is like, what the heck is going on? So, yeah, this is the great work that you get when you support independent media. So, do we even put it on the screen? I didn't know we could do that. Clone42 says, all right, Andrew, you rock. Well, you rock back at you, Clone42. I don't know if you're the 42nd clone or if that's just your nickname, but we welcome you nonetheless. That does it for us for today. Hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. We'll be back next week with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.